Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I hope you're doing well, inshallah. So, recently, there's been a lot going on about the whole saga of Jeffrey Epstein, what happened to him, who's involved, etc. And I'm not going to touch on those, but I'm going to touch on an aspect that I feel is being a bit neglected, which is the, frankly, incredible symbology and esoteric tradition associated with this entire saga, especially centering around the temple complex that he had on his island. So, for those of you who are unaware, Jeffrey Epstein was a private financier, well connected with associates, with very rich elite associates throughout America and abroad. And he owned an island in the British Virgin Islands, which was called Little St. James. On this island, the dominating feature on the island was his temple complex, which took center stage on the island, perched up quite high on a high point of the island. And this temple complex was designed in a very unusual way. Some people are saying it's very similar to bathhouses from the Mamluk period, but yeah, it was a very interesting temple. A lot of dark things have been associated with what took place there. And I'm going to touch on the ceiling of the temple. So when you enter the temple, recently we've been given access by a media group called O'Keefe Media Group. They've given access to everyone behind a paywall of what is adorning the interior of the temple, because there's plenty of videos of what's outside, but now there's actual images and media describing what is inside the actual temple itself. And I think it's quite interesting, and I wanted to share one aspect of it with you guys, which is the adornment of the ceiling, and in particular, a prominent ship that takes center stage of the ceiling itself. So for those of you who are unaware of the image, I've to avoid copyright, I've created a duplicate, very badly drawn duplicate here, of what the ship is meant to look like. And I've labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 key features of the ship. And yeah, I'm going to delve into it now. And the ship, particularly, I took interest in having my naval career in the background, as well as what is actually depicted. So I'm going to start off by telling you this ship is labeled approximately here, the Argo Navis. Argo Navis, meaning the ship Argo, is one of Ptolemy's 48 constellations, and this one is in the southern sky and represents the ship that Jason and the Argonauts went on for their voyage. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jason and the Argonauts' voyage and the meaning and connotations of this potentially for usage in the temple. Jason, the rightful heir to the throne of Oikos, is sent by the usurper King Pelias on a perilous quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece from the distant land of Colchis. To accomplish this, Jason builds a great ship, the Argo, and assembles a crew of legendary heroes known as the Argonauts, including Heracles, Orpheus, and Atalanta. Their journey is filled with dangers and trials. They face harpies, clashing rocks, and hostile kings, all while aided at key moments by the gods. Upon reaching Colchis, Jason is given a series of impossible tasks by King Aeetes, but with the help of the sorceress Medea, who falls in love with him, he succeeds in stealing the fleece. That's the Golden Fleece. Jason and Medea flee Colchis together, overcoming more obstacles on their return voyage. Back in Oikos, Medea helps Jason overthrow Pelias, but their actions lead to exile. They eventually settle in Corinth, where Jason betrays Medea by planning to marry a local princess for political gain. In a fit of rage and heartbreak, Medea exacts a terrible revenge where she kills the princess and her own children before fleeing. Jason is left broken and alone, his once great quest ultimately ending in personal tragedy rather than the glory. So now, after we've talked a bit about the Argo Navis itself and the expedition of Jason and the Argonauts, we're going to head back to the ship diagram and talk through potentially what seems to be another depiction, a more modern day or historical depiction of who the depictor sees as the modern day Argonauts. Who knows? Going to the front of the ship, stern, number 1, there is an emblem there, right at the front of the ship, which depicts this. Now this is an emblem with what I believe are horses, 3 horses, and has striking parallels to the family crest and emblem of the most famous man in the world. Striking resemblance, not saying it's the same, but I'm saying it's very similar. And one key difference is the 2 moons, the 2 crescent moons that are facing towards each other with a star in between. Now, often when we think about Islamic symbols, we think of, for our history, like the crescent and the star. However, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, viewers, there is no depiction of 2 crescents with 1 star in any prominent Islamic empire or tradition. What is often associated with 2 crescents and a star is the pagan goddess Ishtar, and her depictions by other cultures throughout the world. So before the introduction of Christianity and Islam throughout the world, there was various different practices in different regions around the world of the ancient Indo-Aryan religion, evolved in slightly different ways. So in the ancient times, you had Inanna in the Sumerian times, which evolved into Ishtar in ancient Babylon. You also had very similar equivalents of Ishtar in both Europe and India, the other Indo-Aryan regions around the world as well. Particularly in Europe, she was there was a pagan goddess that was associated as being the equivalent of Ishtar and Inanna, and she was often depicted with 2 crescents and a star. And this was especially prominent in the Baltic and Celtic regions of Europe, because these were regions that kind of survived the introduction of Christianity a bit longer. For example, the quite commonly quoted equivalent of the pagan goddess Ishtar is Eostre. I can't say the name. Eostere. And this was a goddess that was supposedly worshipped in the UK, that had very similar parallels to the pagan goddess Ishtar. So yeah, potentially, from my research, that seems to be closest tie I can make to the top, whereas the rest of the crest seems to be very similar with this and the depictions to the most prominent man in the world and the most prominent family in the world. But I'm not saying there's any equivalence, I'm just saying that's the closest I could find. And what's fascinating is that first front, and what's really interesting is this is a ship about Jason and the Argonauts, so potentially these symbols are representing the crew of the Argonauts, and being at the front of the ship potentially representing Jason himself, the main character and the lead of the story. That's naturally what my mind's drawn to, but it's all speculation, of course. Now, talking about the second emblem on the ship. So this is this one here. So a crest depicting the state of Israel, and it takes quite a central, prominent position on the ship, being potentially the closest facing towards us and being right at the front. And yeah, that's very interesting. There's a lot of speculation going on about the involvement of Israel with this whole situation. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that, and of course none of this is going to 100% tie anything to anything. It's just, I'm just talking behind through this unusual depiction of Greek mythology in a very modern case. And moving on to the number 3, here it's a depiction of this crest. So a very famous one, of course. I haven't coloured it in, but it would be red, a red cross and a white background, therefore depicting the Knights Templars, a Teutonic Order of Knights from the period of the Crusades. People in the UK, particularly England and Scotland, will be quite well familiar with the Knights Templar. Particularly around the City of London, there is a lot of remnants of their impact. For example, many pubs being named after key figures or components of the Knights Templar Order, as well as the UK flag, the England flag, the St. George's Cross, which was also used by the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar were quite a secretive group that fought in the Crusades, originally for the Catholic Church and for the Pope, but then were excommunicated by the Pope around rumours of them being influenced by Eastern philosophies and Eastern religions. And therefore they had to go into hiding in Europe. And yeah, throughout history, they've been associated as still existing in some form, one way or the other. And yeah, so they were based during the Crusades, at certain periods of the Crusades, on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and that was their headquarters. On the ship, about 4, you have depictions such as this one I'm going to show you somewhere here. Here we go. So emblems like this, and it's quite hard to try and find the meaning of emblems like this because you have a lot of crests like this. But what is one standing out feature for it is the red and gold aspect to this crest, which isn't obviously depicted here. But yeah, the red and gold kind of alludes potentially to Spanish and Portuguese monarchies, families, ancient, or not ancient, but like old traditions, family traditions that potentially dated back to the colonization of the New World. So I found that quite interesting. But yeah, as I'm saying, this is all speculation. It's just talking about what the ship actually depicts. And then about towards the back end of the ship, there's a few more crests and emblems which I can't really explain to you guys what the exact meaning is, but some of them do seem to depict banking families. So now we have a bit more of an idea about the artwork that was depicted on the temple ceiling on Little St. James Island. So in particular, the ship, me being from a naval background, the ship really drew my eye, and it should, I think, draw everyone's eye, being taking quite a prominent center role on the artwork. And the ship depicting Jason the Argonauts, a collection of people, which in this case, it seems to be depicting a collection of orders, family crests and emblems, all on a journey to a destination as the ship moves through the constellations and sky. Now, what's very interesting is what it talks about, the depiction of the family crest right at the front, and this potentially being linked to the most famous man in the world and the most famous family in the world. Potentially. But there being a lot of parallels between that emblem that's depicted and the emblem of this family. And yeah, it really got me thinking, you know, it seems like there's a story being told here, and the depiction of Jason and the Argonauts the ship of Jason and the Argonauts taking such a prominent role, center stage of this piece of artwork, in this center stage temple on the island. It might be depicting, you know, some kind of parallels with the key themes in that story. The key themes being trials, temptations taken on by Jason and his partners, challenges, then the betrayal that happens, that Jason betrays Medea by falling in love, by taking the hand of a princess for political purposes, and then the eventual betrayal and supposed justice of Jason carried out by Medea. So yeah, this betrayal of the leading character by a female is center stage to the story, and it's center stage for this temple. And this main character, who is destined for glory and, you know, love, widespread love, for committing all these challenges, for saving the kingdom from a tyrant, etc., etc., etc. This figure who is destined for glory suddenly being drawn away and becoming being defeated, everything taken away from him. Could this potentially be alluding to the events that are currently undergoing right now? Allahu Alam. But yeah, it's very interesting, the speculation around this, the imagery around this, and why it's important to be somewhat familiar with some of the symbolism that's being used in the modern day and by certain families and certain groups. And yes, we shouldn't delve too much into this, because our primary purpose is to better ourselves as individuals and not to speculate too much about these areas. But I thought some of my background in understanding paganism, in particular Greek and Roman mythology, in this situation, came in useful to kind of describe what is currently being overlooked a lot by the media, which is the ship Argo taking center stage in the center stage artwork on the center stage temple, which is central to this whole situation. So thanks all for watching, and inshallah I'll catch you all soon.